If you enjoy insane real-life drama, where arrogance meets karma and the underdog comes out on top, then stick around, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories of ordinary people standing up against outrageous power trips. It all started when I bought my modest little house in what was supposed to be a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people minded their business, waved at each other when taking out the trash, and maybe borrowed a cup of sugar once in a while. Nothing more and nothing less, but everything turned upside down the day Karen, the self-appointed queen of the block, decided I needed to be part of her homeowners association even though my property wasn't legally within its jurisdiction. And when I politely told her, "No thanks, I'm fine taking care of my lawn without paying you $300 a month," she looked at me like I had personally slapped her across the face, her eyes narrowing with that classic Karen glare, lips pursed so tightly I thought they might implode, and in that moment I knew this wasn't over, but I underestimated just how far she was willing to go, because 3 weeks later I received a certified letter saying she and her HOA board, which was basically her husband, and one neighbor who seemed scared of her, were suing me for refusal to comply with community covenants, which made no sense since my deed had no mention of an HOA, but she was betting I didn't know that, and I guess she thought I'd just roll over and pay to avoid trouble, but instead I did the one thing Karens hate the most. I stayed calm, I smiled, and I lawyered up. The first twist came when my attorney, after laughing for a full 5 minutes at her complaint, told me we had a golden opportunity to not just win but dismantle her entire fake empire, because in her arrogance she had filed paperwork that contradicted itself, citing bylaws that didn't even exist and claiming jurisdiction over parcels of land never annexed. So when the court date came, instead of me nervously defending myself, it was Karen sputtering in front of a judge who was clearly irritated that his time was being wasted. But Karen, never one to back down, screeched about community standards and the good of the neighborhood, waving a stack of papers that turned out to be nothing more than printouts from a DIY HOA template she'd found online, and the judge dismissed her case in under 10 minutes. But here's where the story really gets delicious. Instead of just walking away, I decided to go nuclear, because my lawyer pointed out that what she had been doing, collecting dues from a handful of intimidated neighbors, threatening fines, and even placing bogus liens on houses, wasn't just obnoxious, it was illegal. And if we pushed the right buttons, we could unravel the whole scam in days. So that's exactly what we did. I started with research, digging through property records, plat maps, county filings, and everything I could find, and it turned out that not only was Karen's HOA never properly registered, but she had been filing paperwork with forged signatures, including one neighbor who had moved out of state 10 years ago, and another who had died. Yes, she had literally used a dead man's name to fake consent. And when I brought this to my lawyer, his grin was so wide I thought his face might split, because this was slam dunk fraud, and all we had to do was deliver it to the right authorities. The next twist came when Karen showed up at my house 2 days later, before any official moves had been made, banging on my door with 2 other board members behind her, demanding I withdraw false allegations against her or she'd make my life a living hell. And when I calmly asked if she was aware that trespassing and harassment could add to her growing list of legal problems, she actually shoved a piece of paper in my face. Another fine for $500 for having my trash can visible, even though it was collection day and everyone's cans were out. And I couldn't help but laugh, which only made her more furious, and she screamed that she ran this neighborhood, and people like me needed to fall in line. But little did she know that while she was busy throwing her tantrum, I had already submitted every document, every fraudulent signature, every illegal lien, and every fake bylaw to the state attorney general's office, and they moved faster than I expected, because within 5 days investigators were knocking on her door, not mine, and suddenly the queen of the cul-de-sac was reduced to a stammering wreck. The fallout was glorious. The so-called HOA was declared null and void because it had never been legally established. Every lien Karen had filed was erased, and neighbors who had paid thousands in bogus dues were now part of a class action suit against her, with potential restitution that could bankrupt her. But the best part came when the county announced that Karen herself might face charges for fraud, forgery, and harassment, which carried the possibility of jail time, and suddenly all the people who had been too scared to stand up to her were cheering me on, bringing over cookies and thank you cards, calling me the HOA Slayer, which I admit I kind of enjoyed. But here's another twist. Not everyone was happy, because Karen's husband tried to spin the narrative that I had destroyed community unity, and for a brief moment some neighbors wondered if maybe I'd gone too far, until the news broke that Karen had been siphoning some of the collected dues into a private account and using them for spa trips and luxury handbags, at which point any lingering sympathy for her evaporated completely, and she became a pariah overnight, cars slowing down to gawk at her house, whispers following her at the grocery store, invitations drying up like puddles in the sun. 5 days was all it took to bring her empire crashing down, 5 days between her smug lawsuit and the official shutdown of everything she had built on lies. But the story didn't end there, because in the weeks that followed, a new spirit actually blossomed in the neighborhood, one without an HOA, where people decided to organize voluntary community events like block parties and yard sales, not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to, and ironically the neighborhood looked better, friendlier, and more alive than it ever had under Karen's reign, and sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of her peeking through her blinds, scowling at the sight of kids playing tag on the street or neighbors laughing together, powerless to stop any of it, and though she tried one last desperate move by creating a Facebook group called True Residents Association, where she ranted about me being a menace, barely anyone joined, and eventually the page was reported and taken down, leaving her isolated in her bitterness. To this day, people still bring up the time Karen sued me for refusing to join her HOA, as the neighborhood legend, the story of how one stubborn guy with the right lawyer managed to topple a tyrant in less than a week, and every time I tell it, I make sure to emphasize the lesson. Bullies count on fear and ignorance, but when you stand your ground with facts and law on your side, even the loudest Karen can be silenced, and sometimes, just sometimes, justice moves faster than you ever dreamed.